Hey y'all, we finally made it to the two trials, the final episode of this series. I've been very intrigued by this older case. I hope I did it justice. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If anyone has any other ideas for older cases or anything you'd love to see me cover, please feel free to drop it in the comments below or send it to my social media listed in the description. Also, please be sure to like, subscribe, share, and hit the notification bell so you get notified when I drop content or go live. Thank you for your continued support. As we dive into these two trials, some of what we've already heard discovered in the case as a whole will repeat, but for the sake of the video's ability to stand on its own, I've kept the previous heard details intact. Many New Yorkers thought Alice Crimmins was a bad person who had committed a terrible crime. However, some people believe that she was unfairly treated because she didn't fit in with what society expected and that she was wrongly judged instead of getting help to find out what really happened to her children. On the morning of July 14, 1965, Edmund Crimmins reported that his two children were missing from the Queens apartment where they lived with his estranged wife, Alice. Police searched the neighborhood hoping to find 5-year-old Addi Crimmins Jr. and 4-year-old Alice Marie Crimmins, who was also known as Missy, alive. In the early afternoon, Missy's lifeless body was discovered in a vacant lot. The window on the first floor of the kids' room was open, but the police were more focused on Alice Crimmins' reputation as someone who had many different romantic partners. Because there wasn't much physical evidence, the detectives thought she might be involved because of her relationships and because she didn't start crying right away when she saw her daughter's body. Both parents were questioned by the police about their troubled marriage. A court hearing about who would get custody of the children was supposed to begin on July 19th. However, on that day, the badly decomposed body of Addi Jr. was found in some bushes near the busy Van Wyck Expressway. Alice Crimmins became increasingly upset with the police, who suspected her of a crime. She felt they weren't doing enough to find the real culprits and stopped cooperating with them. As a result, the detectives and district attorneys started to believe she was guilty. They used wiretaps, electronic surveillance, and interviewed many people who knew her but couldn't find any evidence against her. The district attorney's office tried multiple times to get grand juries to charge her, and they finally succeeded after a third attempt. Alice Crimmins was accused of unaliving Missy, as there wasn't enough evidence left of Addi Jr.'s body to support an unaliving charge. The trial started in May 1968, almost 3 years after the Crimmins children went missing. A famous forensic pathologist, Dr. Milton Halpern, was called to testify. He said that Missy Crimmins was strangled and that the food in her stomach could not have been eaten more than 2 hours before she died. This contradicted what Alice said, that she fed the children at 7:30 p.m., 2 hours before putting them to bed, and over 4 hours before she last saw them alive at midnight. Before the expected custody battle, one of Alice's lovers, a contractor named Joe Rorick, remembered her saying that she would rather see the children unalive than allow her husband to take them. On the night of the disappearance, Rorick said he called her apartment twice at 2 a.m. and got no answer. Rorick claimed that 14 months after the children were found, there was a tearful confession at a Long Island restaurant. He said, quote, "She admitted that there was no reason for them to be unalived. It was senseless." Rorick nervously told the prosecutor, quote, "I said Missy and Addi are unalive." And she said, "Joseph, please forgive me. I unalived her." Alice shouted from the defense table, "Joseph, that isn't true." After Judge Peter Farrell calmed things down, Rorick said that he felt guilty and decided to testify later on. He admitted that he was heavily drunk when he called the apartment, so there was a chance he dialed the wrong number. Rorick was a married man with 7 children. The defense claimed that he was a bitter ex seeking revenge and lying under oath, and that his personal and business problems were being taken advantage of by the district attorney's office. There was a surprise witness in the case, a housewife named Sophie Iromersky. She claimed she saw a woman who she identified as Alice Crimmins outside her window at 2 a.m. The woman was carrying a bundle of blankets and was with a man and a little boy. The man seemed to be rushing the woman who had a pregnant dog on a leash. The man threw the bundle into the car, and the woman protested. There was a heated exchange between the man and the woman Alice Crimmins, seemed nervous and frightened. In the courtroom, Alice Crimmins denied the witness's account and became upset. The defense portrayed Iromirski as someone who was easily influenced and enjoyed being in the spotlight. They said that no one knew about the Crimmins dog pregnancy until after the unalivings had already happened. Alice was initially calm when she was questioned about her children, but then she became emotional and cried during her testimony. The next day, she faced tough questions from prosecutor Anthony Lombardino. As Lombardino sarcastically asked her about her children's whereabouts during her many affairs, Crimmins became angry. The courtroom became chaotic, with lawyers shouting and the spectators in the gallery making noise. The judge had to step in and remind everyone that they were there to try a homicide case, not a case about moral issues. During deliberations, one juror reached out by telephone the night after their first vote, saying that they had voted at noon the day prior and agreed that Crimmins was guilty on both counts. I'm not sure who this juror reached out to. If anyone has more information on this, please leave it in the comments below. This is bothersome to me because we know that jurors are not supposed to be in contact with anyone during deliberations, and even the bailiffs are only supposed to take them to and from the jury room. During the afternoon, they debated the various degrees, with two men holding out for a lesser degree in the boy's death. Toward the end of deliberations, Crimmins was seen emerging from a police van, shaking and white-faced after a sleepless night. On May 27, 1968, an all-male jury found Alice Crimmins guilty. Before Judge Farrell could decide her punishment, Crimmins accused the district attorneys of not caring about finding the person responsible for her children's deaths. She was convicted of manslaughter in the first degree. As a side note, that verdict was later overturned because two jurors made an unauthorized visit to the crime scene. Alice's younger brother, John Burke, jumped from his aisle seat as 7 security guards surrounded the shaking defendant to take her from the courtroom. He tried to force his way through a barrier of guards to reach her, but they pushed him back, and she was taken from the room sobbing. Assistant prosecuting attorney Anthony Lombardino was beaming. On his way out, he shook hands with some spectators who crowded the hallway. 6 months later, she was accused of a crime once again. Because of a legal rule called double jeopardy, which stops people from being tried for the same crime more than once, she couldn't be charged again with unaliving Missy. Instead, she was charged with manslaughter and accused of unaliving Eddie Jr. This was mainly because Rorick, a key witness, claimed that she had, quote, agreed to her son's death. In the second trial, it was clear that the detectives didn't handle the investigation well. They didn't handle potential evidence from the Crimmins apartment properly, and there were concerns about Sophie Iromirski's mental state. Joe Rorick also changed his testimony, saying that Crimmins had told him that a convicted bank robber, Vinnie Colabella, was responsible for Eddie Jr.'s death. Prosecutors brought Colabella to the stand, but he said he had never met Crimmins. Also, the prosecutors from the first trial, Anthony Lombardino, was called as a witness and admitted to offering Colabella, quote, a deal in exchange for his testimony. The defense questioned the prosecutor's claim that Crimmins wanted her children unalived because of her custody battle with her husband. Her husband stood by her side during both trials. Her divorce lawyer told the court that he had reassured her that she would not lose her children under New York law, no matter what was said about her character. On the night the Crimmins children went missing, a new witness named Tina DeVita said she saw a woman with a man carrying a bundle, a boy, and a dog. Another witness, Sophie Iromirski, had described something similar before. After DeVita spoke, Alice Crimmins asked the public for help. Then a man named Marvin Weinstein came forward and said he was walking in the neighborhood with his family. His wife was carrying their daughter in a blanket, and she looked like Alice Crimmins. When a former business associate said that Weinstein didn't visit him that night, The Weinsteins said he was lying. Mr. Weinstein explained that he hadn't come forward earlier because he didn't realize how vital Iromirski's testimony was to the case. When the jury foreman read the verdict, the harshest possible outcome after 16 hours of deliberations, Alice Crimmins collapsed on the counsel table and began to scream. "Oh my God, how could they do it?" Her two attorneys clutched her in their arms and tried to console her. Loud gasps of shock echoed through the packed courtroom at the State Supreme Court in Queens, causing many women to weep openly. The defendant's mom, Alice Burke, cried out, "Oh, Jesus, no, it couldn't be." John Burke, the defendant's younger brother, fell to his knees and started crying. Sitting next to him, her ex-husband Edmund Crimmins bowed his head. Throughout this time, the 12 male jurors who looked solemn and tired stayed on their feet. Judge George J. Balbach polled each of them separately about the verdict, and they all said yes, while 32-year-old Alice Crimmins continued to sob. Judge Balbach then ordered Crimmins to be remanded into the Manhattan House of Detention for Women to await sentencing on May 13th. The punishment for unaliving is life imprisonment for first-degree manslaughter, a maximum of 25 years. Two assistant district attorneys, Thomas DeMarcos and Vincent Nicolosi, looked depressed and solemn. They lingered in the courtroom discussing the verdict, and one was overheard saying he was stunned by its severity. As spectators began to file slowly from the courtroom, Herbert Lyon, the chief defense attorney, his eyes red, his hands shaking, said he had not expected the verdict. He said he hoped an appeal would ultimately free her. The trial, the second courtroom examination of an unaliving case now 6 years old, began on March 15th and involved gangsters, convicts, and the underworld, sex, adultery, and allegations of, quote, deals between prosecutors and, quote, witnesses. In all, 64 witnesses testified. Among the few indisputable facts brought out in the more than 5 weeks of testimony were that at 9 a.m. on July 14, 1965, Mrs. Alice Crimmins reported her children were missing, that her daughter's body was found a few hours later, and the boy's body was discovered July 19th. The evidence against Alice Crimmins seemed very weak. People in the courtroom were shocked and upset when she was found guilty again. In May 1971, she was given a life sentence for unaliving, an additional 5 to 20 years for manslaughter. 2 years after being accused of unaliving, the court decided that there was not enough evidence to prove that Addi's unaliving was a result of a criminal act. Additionally, the manslaughter conviction was overturned due to errors made during the trial, such as misleading testimony and prejudicial statements. As a result, the court ordered a retrial, but only for the manslaughter charge. In February 1975, the highest court in New York reinstated the verdict that found Alice Crimmins guilty of causing the unaliving of her daughter. The court said that 2 juries had already found her guilty, so the conviction was fair. Some judges didn't agree with this decision, saying that it weakened the traditional standard of proof in criminal cases. Crimmins was then ordered to complete her sentence. She was released on parole in 1977, bringing an end to a very emotional and troubling case in New York courts. Crimmins got married to her longtime millionaire boyfriend, Anthony Grace, and they moved to Boca Raton, Florida, to live a quiet life. However, after his passing, there have been reports of her being seen back in Queens and on Long Island. Even though she was convicted, the deaths of her children are still one of the most puzzling, unsolved mysteries in Queens for many people. Appeals in this sensational New York case led to a ruling that courtroom errors are only prejudicial when there is a strong probability that they have influenced a jury's verdict. Now that you've heard about the 2 trials, I will add some important points to consider. Let's begin by examining the contradictory stories. The evidence presented to the jury was weak. The only evidence they had was the testimony of one witness against another. For instance, Sophie Iromursky and Joseph Roerich testified for the prosecution, while Marvin Weinstein and Vincent Colabella testified for the defense. There were also conflicting pictures of Alice Crimmins. Was she a housewife who preferred having romances to caring for her children and who saw her children as hindrances? That was what the prosecution maintained. Or was she a swinger, as the defense admitted, but not an unaliver? An easygoing woman who liked to play and have a good time, but who loved her children and was genuinely distraught and shocked when their bodies were found. Now we'll talk about the report of confession. The prosecution's main argument was that Crimmins confessed. Joseph Roerich, a Long Island contractor who consistently dated her, testified that Crimmins told him she had unalived her daughter and, quote, agreed to the death of her son. Roerich said she even named Vincent Colabella, a convicted narcotics dealer, as the man who helped her. The evidence suggested that she may have been the victim of a jealous, rejected lover. Roerich had allegedly schemed for years to destroy this woman who had once teased and laughed with him. During the 1968 trial, he accepted a deal from the prosecution and in return agreed to reveal the alleged confession. The prosecution denied this while the defense affirmed it. Vinnie Colabella himself agreed with the defense. He was flown from the federal penitentiary in Atlanta, where he was serving a 20-year sentence for selling narcotics. He testified twice on behalf of Crimmins, a woman he said he had never seen before. Colabella was seen as a significant figure in the trial, almost as much as the defendant. The prosecution claimed that he was involved in the unaliving of Addi Jr. However, he was never formally accused of the crime, and the evidence presented in court showed that his name was never brought up to any of the 3 grand juries that looked into the case. His memorable remarks from the witness stand, however, captured everyone's attention during the trial. If true, they offered the courtroom a glimpse of the Office of the District Attorney's intentions, as they were committed to proving Alice Crimmins guilty and convicting her. A former district attorney stated that Colabella claimed he was told he could avoid punishment if he testified against Crimmins. The prosecutor allegedly pressured him to say that he found the children already unalived when he arrived. The quotes allegedly were, "You can go home free," and "Why don't you say when you got there the children were already unalive?" The prosecution's case also centered on the man, the woman, the dog, and the little boy walking near the Crimmins apartment in Kew Gardens Hills at 2 a.m. on the night in question. One of the witnesses, Sophie Iromursky, identified the woman as Alice Crimmins. She overheard the couple talking 3 floors below and was certain that the phrases she heard were referring to the body of Missy wrapped in the bundle in the woman's arms. The prosecution's attempts to substantiate this account and the defense's attempts to discredit it took up hours of testimony. Tina DeVita testified for the state that she had observed the same family group. Marvin Weinstein testified for the defense, stating that he, his wife, his dog, his little boy, and his infant daughter had all been in the same spot at the same time. He emphasized that it was possible for his family to have been the one that was seen. The prosecution responded with testimony from Anthony King, who stated that Mr. Weinstein had lied. Following that, 2 additional witnesses testified for the defense: Mrs. Weinstein, who supported her husband's account, and Sheldon Weiss, who claimed that Mr. King had a reputation for dishonesty. Appellate process. An appeal by Alice Crimmins, who had spent 20 months in prison for child unaliving, was argued on January 18, 1975, before the Appellate Division in Brooklyn, New York. The appellate court listened to extensive briefs from both sides. The defense alone submitted a 175-page brief. During their oral arguments, defense lawyers Herbert Lyon and William Earlbaum focused on the, quote, fairness of the trial. They were expected to argue that the jury may have been prejudiced by unsubstantiated hints of underworld involvement and that the panel should have been sequestered due to the extensive publicity the case received. On May 6, 1975, the Appellate Division upheld the conviction of Alice Crimmins in a 3-2 decision for the manslaughter of her 4-year-old daughter Alice Marie in 1965. The court also denied a motion by Crimmins' lawyer for a new trial. The appellate division thus arrived at the same conclusion as the state's highest tribunal, the Court of Appeals, that there was overwhelming proof that the former Queen's cocktail bar waitress unalived her daughter. Thus, the appellate division reversed its earlier ruling, which set aside a Supreme Court verdict finding her guilty of manslaughter. On July 15, 1977, Crimmins married Anthony Grace, the contractor with whom she had an affair. He testified in court admitting to the affair that he said had occurred at the time her 2 young children were allegedly kidnapped and unalived. In November 1977, Crimmins was granted parole after serving 5 years of a 5 to 20-year sentence. During that time, she worked as a secretary for an undisclosed company in Queens as part of a work release program. She continued working for the same company after her release. After being released, Alice Crimmins, now known as Alice Crimmins Grace, hurried into a waiting car to start her new life with Anthony Grace. She left the residential facility wearing a printed dress and a large scarf covering her head. Her lawyers announced their plan to file an appeal to clear her name. They had recently submitted papers to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Herbert Lyon, one of her lawyers, stated that the appeal was based on the prosecution's failure to inform the defense counsel about a potential witness who supposedly had crucial information for the case. After thoroughly examining this case, I do believe it was a setup, partly due to the way she chose to live her life. It seems that she sought companionship due to feeling emotionally abandoned by her husband Edmund Sr. and was in a vulnerable state of mind. I genuinely do think she cared for her children, Addi Jr. and Missy, and based on the information I've reviewed, I don't believe she had any intention of causing them harm. It's possible that her estranged husband, Addi Sr., orchestrated or carried out the setup. Despite seeking the company of his friends instead of being with his wife, he might have framed Alice out of resentment for her seeking solace in other men. In my opinion, he took advantage of her lifestyle, knowing it would be looked at unfavorably at the time because he knew that is exactly what would happen. If this case were tried today, the lack of evidence and the prosecution's attempt to portray her choices as more important than her children would likely make it difficult for a jury to reach a verdict. The prosecution tried to depict a mother who prioritized parties and fun over her children, portraying them as a burden and expendable. I believe a jury would likely struggle to reach a verdict in a case with such weak evidence as this. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on my findings and opinions in the comments below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to discussing another case with y'all soon. We've reached the end of my first series. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to bringing you more in the near future. Keep a lookout for my next case. Thank you to my producer, Suzuki, for all her hard work gathering case info. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Bye.